All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. Sure, some people will be popping in here as we get moving, but like I said on Wednesday, today we're moving on to the next unit, which is about audio media. So specifically about the recording industry and about radio. Like I said, I'm hoping this is going to be more interesting to you guys because you actually engage with audio media more often than print media. Not a whole lot of people are really interested in reading these days, but they're a lot more interested in music. So hopefully this will kind of spark more interest in you guys. Again, as with print media, there are important differences between the types, right? Books and magazines and newspapers aren't the same, but they do share a very common ancestry. They do share, a lot of similar traits and trends. Same goes with the audio media, right? They're not the same, right? The radio and the music industry are not the same, but they do share a lot of common ancestry and a lot of common themes and trends. And that's why we kind of put them together here, right? There we go. Let's go through the history, right? Let's do a quick and dirty history of audio media in the United States specifically. It begins in 1877, right? So we're not going to go nearly as far back as we did with print media. In 1877, Thomas Edison demonstrates the phonograph. Really not that long ago. If you look at the grand scheme of things, 1877 was not that long ago whatsoever. And so when Edison demonstrates the phonograph in 1877, what he's demonstrating is, hey, look, we can record and play back sound. And this is a big freaking deal, right? In 1877, the phonograph itself was really more of a novelty. It was look at how cool this idea is. It was not designed. It was not created. It was not intended to be everyone should have this. It was kind of hey, look at this cool thing I can do. I also want to make special note here that the phrasing there is important. Please, for the love of all things holy, do not write in your notes that Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, because he didn't. One of the many recurring themes we have in my classes is that Thomas Edison is full of shit. Thomas Edison invented almost nothing in his lifetime. All he did was take credit for other people's work. Thomas Edison was brilliant at using the patent process in his favor, but he was not a brilliant inventor whatsoever. So Edison did not invent the phonograph. He merely demonstrated it. One thing you need to know about how this works and why we tend to think of Thomas Edison as this inventor is because of the way that patents work. If I pay someone to create an idea for me or to create an object for me, by law, I get the patent on that thing because I paid them to do it. Your intellectual property is not your intellectual property if somebody paid you to develop that property. So Thomas Edison didn't invent the phonograph. He paid somebody else to invent it. And then Edison would go out and do the demonstrations of it and have his name attached to it and everything because he was a self-aggrandizing whore. So when Edison demonstrates the phonograph in 1877, aside from the fact that he's a horrible human being and should be forgotten for all time, aside from that, it was a huge move in terms of media because this is the first time we had a means of recording for later playback of audio, of sound. Originally, the phonograph was not a disc. Today when we think of phonograph, we tend to think of a record player, but the original phonograph was actually a cylinder. It was like this clay cylinder. It didn't allow for a lot of space. You couldn't record a lot on there, and it wasn't really clean, right? It was very crackly. It was very muffled. It was not clean audio, but it was definitely recorded audio. You could definitely tell it was a recording of sound, and that was a huge, huge step. These clay cylinders were also very, very fragile, as most clay is. And as a result of that, very few of the original cylinders remain. Most of them have been broken, very much on accident, but most of them have shattered because they're very easy to shatter. 1899, Guillermo Marconi, who I am contractually obligated to say his name as such, Guillermo Marconi introduces the wireless radio. There is significant dispute amongst historians as to whether or not Marconi invented the radio or merely was the first one to talk about it. There's significant debate as to whether or not Nikola Tesla actually invented the radio, but he just didn't, he wasn't as flamboyant or showy as Edison and Marconi. So we say that Marconi introduced the wireless radio just so we can, because that's a certainty, right? We know that Marconi was the one who showed the world. It wasn't recorded, right? The wireless radio was a live transmission, right? But it was a way for person in spot A to get their message out to everywhere else in the world simultaneously, right? In real time. Now, at that point, right, transmission was very, very short. Transmission distances were very low. You couldn't actually transmit all over the world, but you could transmit over a distance without having to run wire from one point to the next. Prior to the wireless radio, the way that messages were transmitted over long distances was through telegram. And telegrams had to have a wire. You had to be physically connected from one point to another. And that creates a lot of challenges. It creates a lot of infrastructure problems. If that wire is damaged, there you go. Communication is lost, right? You have to maintain, you have to set up. There's all kinds of other problems that come along with wired transmission. So when Marconi introduces the wireless radio to the American public, it's a huge deal because now I can go anywhere, right? And if I have this radio with an antenna, I can pick up this transmission. In 1906, we get the first voice and music broadcast in the United States. So 7 years after Marconi introduces the wireless radio, we get the first, what we would now think of as radio station, right? For the first time in 1906, someone broadcasts person speaking followed by music playing afterwards, which is really the basis of all popular radio today, is you got a DJ and you've got music. The DJ is talking to introduce sounds, and then after the sounds stop, the DJ talks some more. And so it was 1906 that we first see the concept of radio as we know it today take form, right? Kind of take real shape. In 1914, ASCAP is formed. ASCAP stands for American Society of Composers and Producers. I'll say that again so you guys can write it down. American Society for Composers and Producers. ASCAP is an organization that still exists today, and their purpose today is the same as it was when they were created, and that is to protect the copyright and protect the royalties of composers and producers. Prior to 1914, if you wrote music, if you created sheet music, it was really hard to make money off of that because anybody and their mother could go playing it and, there you go. It's out there in the world. ASCAP was formed by a collective of composers and producers to say, hey, we should get royalties for our work. Even after we've written it, 20 years from now, we should still be getting royalties from people performing our music. And that's what ASCAP does today, is whenever a piece of music is performed, the writers and the producers of that music get a royalty, right? They get a certain amount of money based on their contract for that reproduction, for that playing of their music. This is absolutely critical in the radio industry today, because if you want to play, I don't know who's a musician today, Taylor Swift. If you want to play a Taylor Swift song on the radio, you need to write down, you need to record every time you play it, right? You need to keep a log of every time you play Taylor Swift's music, so that you can pay the producers and the writers of that music for playing it. This is also true of live performance, right? Here at Highland Community College, we have a big band, we have a jazz band, we got a choral group, all that kind of stuff. Well, we have to pay what's called an ASCAP license, which means that if the Royal Scots, right, the singing group of Highland, if they want to perform a song written by, Nat King Cole, they have to pay the estate of Nat King Cole for the rights to sing that song. Even though it's not Nat King Cole singing it, right? It's just his intellectual property. If we're going to reproduce his intellectual property, then we have to pay a small amount of money for every time we play, every time we perform that piece of intellectual property. So the introduction of ASCAP, the formation of ASCAP, allows writers and composers a way to make a living. It allows them to get paid for their work as people use their work, which was a revolutionary idea. It was a huge, huge, huge deal in 1940. In 1920, KDKA becomes the first commercial radio station. Commercial radio station means radio station for profit, right? That's what any commercial venture is. A commercial venture is something that is done for the purpose of making more money. So in 1920 is the first time a radio station goes out to the world with the idea that I'm going to make money off of this. So it took 21 years from 1899 to 1920 before somebody thought, wait a minute, I could profit off of this idea. And so KDKA becomes the first commercial radio station in the United States by playing music, by having DJs introduce the music, by having news segments, talk segments, and most importantly, having sponsors. Radio is finally used as advertising in 1920. It's almost hard to believe that it took 21 years before somebody realized, wait a minute, I could use this for advertising. When you consider in the modern day, as soon as an idea is constructed, we immediately think about how we can profit off of it. We immediately think about how to use it for financial gain. It took 21 years before radio was profitized, before radio became something that was used to make people money through advertising. In 1927, Congress passes the Radio Act. It is a rare thing when the United States Congress passes a law and it goes untouched for almost 100 years. This is one of those rare instances. The Radio Act of 1927 is still in service today. It is still the law of the land today. And when you find out what the Radio Act is, that should shock the shit out of you. That should be really surprising to you. In 1927, Congress realized that commercial radio stations were popping up all over the place. And as is the tendency to happen when there's a new market, when there's an emerging industry, there was severe competition over who owned the different aspects of the industry. Think about how a radio works, right? You get in your car or you turn on your Walkman, what year is it? And you turn your little dial until it's on 96.7 FM. And you know that when you tune to 96.7 FM, you're going to get this radio station. You know the radio station you're going to get. Because that's the only radio station broadcasting on 96.7 FM. Prior to the Radio Act, that was not a guarantee. There was no regulation whatsoever over who got what space in the airwaves. It was the Wild West. It was an open market. And so what Congress did in 1927 to settle all these disputes over like whose wavelengths, what were, did it belong to, Congress passed the Radio Act, which in its most fundamental form says airwaves are free. We, the United States government, will not assert control over who uses what bandwidth on the radio. They gave the airwaves away. In exchange, anyone who produces content for radio distribution must do so, quote, for the common good. That's critical. The Radio Act of 1927 says that anybody can broadcast, but you have to do it for the common good. I ask you, in 2020, what is the common good that is propagated or supported by playing Taylor Swift music? If you have an answer to that, you're a better person than me. As try as I might, I have no fucking clue how that is for the common good.
It's inspirational.
You shut your mouth, Benjamin.
All right.
Inspires me to change the channel, huh?
The real answer is it's not, right? It's not. No one in their right mind is going to claim that playing Taylor Swift is for the common good. Instead, the way that radio stations work in this common good thing is by playing public service announcements or PSAs, right? Which are commercials for nonprofit entities in their market. That's why they play, you know, you'll see ads on television and hear ads on the radio for the ASPCA, right? Or for the Salvation Army, right? That's why radio stations all have little news blurbs, right? They all do top of the hour, big news of the day, because that's how they meet that for the common good. We're doing this because it's for the common good. And in the meanwhile, we're going to make a bunch of money off of advertisements and playing music that people want to hear, but we're going to do the common good thing by playing a commercial every once in a while for a nonprofit, or by telling you what happened in the world today. That's still the law today. Again, in 1927 to today, that's still the law. That Radio Act was then later applied to television, which is why television stations have public service announcements on them, which is the only reason television stations play public service announcements. It's still in service today. Think about how different the world of media is in 2020 as opposed to 1927. We're regulating modern technological media advancements using a law that was passed before most people had seen a car. That should terrify you. It's also something we're going to see is nothing unique. We do that a lot. We continue to be behind the curve when it comes to laws and regulations about media. And we'll see many more examples of that as we move forward in the class. 1934, Congress establishes the FCC. Does anybody know what FCC stands for? It's one of my favorite trivia questions. I'll take that as a no. FCC stands for Federal Communications Commission. Federal Communications Commission.
You didn't give me enough time to search it on my other monitor.
Well, that's not, Ben, God damn it, that is not what the question was for. Ugh. The Federal Communications Commission. So in 1934, Congress establishes the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and their job is to regulate broadcast. That's it. That's their job. There's a whole lot of devil in the details issues there, right? But that's the main gist. Regulate broadcast. If you are going to put something out over the airways for public consumption, for general public consumption, then the FCC has the power to regulate that. They have the power to penalize infractions of that. They have the right to license people to be on air. The FCC is in charge of everything that goes out over public consumption broadcasting. So every radio station, AM and FM, every network broadcast, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, PBS, they all fall under the jurisdiction of the FCC. They suck. That's an editorialization. Sorry, I should have mentioned that ahead of time. This is my personal opinion. They fucking suck. The FCC is just, they're Satan. I hate the FCC so much for loads of reasons that we will get to. But I wanted to prepare you up front, let you know my internal bias as we talk about the FCC. Every time we talk about the FCC, there will undoubtedly be a hint of disgust in my voice as we talk about them. And I just wanted to preface that, wanted to warn you, give you the heads up. I am anti-FCC. All right. In 1936, the FCC begins licensing FM stations. In 1936, the FCC says, you know what? Rather than reactively regulating radio, let's proactively do it. And so they begin a system of licensing wherein before I can broadcast for public consumption, I need permission from the FCC about what I'm going to broadcast and where I'm going to broadcast it. So in 1936 is the first time that the FCC tells people on FM bandwidth, okay, 96.7 in this market area is dedicated only for this particular user, and they are going to play this particular type of programming, and they have this license for 7 years. So for 7 years, this is just their space. You can almost think of licensing like a rental agreement, like a lease, right? If I get an apartment, right, that is basically my landlord and me agreeing that for this 12-month period, you're agreeing that this is my space to use. Even though you own it, I get to use it. And I agree to pay you for that trade, right? I agree to pay you to use your space. That's really what FM licensing is. It's a radio station paying the FCC to borrow that space on the radio dial for a certain period of time. The licensing comes with a lot of restrictions, a lot of rules, right? You're not allowed to do, to say certain things. You're not allowed to do certain things. And if you do, you violate the contract, and the FCC can fine you and or take away your license altogether. Again, like a landlord. You agree when you rent that apartment that there's certain things you're not going to do. And if you do, the landlord has recourse to either make you pay a fine or to just kick you out altogether. Right? Again, licensing, renting, kind of the same idea. In 1939, BMI is formed. This is the good BMI, not the horrible BMI that is used only to antagonize and bully people. This is not body mass index. That's the bad BMI that no one should take seriously because it's fucking ridiculous. We're talking about BMI in the music industry, right? BMI in the music industry was a lot like ASCAP. Whereas ASCAP ensured royalties for composers and producers, for the people who write the music, BMI ensured royalties for the performers of the music. So if the Highland Royal Scots perform a song written by Nat King Cole, we pay an ASCAP licensing fee to perform the music. But if the Highland Theater program uses the recorded sound from Hamilton in a production, we have to pay the BMI licensing fee to the performers on the recording. ASCAP protects the writers, BMI protects the performers. ASCAP is for sheet music, BMI is for recordings. That means radio stations need to have both an ASCAP and BMI license. Because if my radio station is going to play a song by Taylor Swift, I need to pay a fee to Taylor Swift because it's her recording, it's her voice on the recording, it's her performance. But I also need to pay a fee to the people who wrote that song. This is why Sir Mix-a-Lot is still rich. I don't know if you guys knew that. Sir Mix-a-Lot, the guy who did Baby Got Back, still rich. Unlike so many other performers from the same time, from his peer group who had one-hit wonders, why is he still loaded? Because he was smart, right? He was the one who wrote the beat, wrote the lyrics, and performed it. He did it all. So he gets a license. He gets a royalty every time not only the song itself is played, but somebody just uses the beat. You don't have to play the recording of Baby Got Back for Sir Mix-a-Lot to get paid. If you just use that dun, 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 if you just use that bass line, he's getting paid. And it gets used a lot. A lot. So Sir Mix-a-Lot was brilliant because he was able to get the royalty and licensing fees on every level for that song. That's why Taylor Swift is able to be rolling in the cash. It's not because she's good, it's because she's smart. She's the writer of her music, right? She has a writing credit on everything she does. So she gets the ASCAP licenses and the BMI licensing fees. She's double dipping in royalties every time one of her songs are played. Okay? So when BMI forms in 1939, recorded music is more and more popular. It's more accessible, right? More and more people have record players. More and more people have radios in their homes. There's more and more recorded music being used. When ASCAP formed in 1914, there weren't a whole lot of recordings, right? There weren't a whole lot of, the recording industry was very, very, very infantile. There just wasn't a lot out there. So you didn't worry about copywriting the actual performance. It was the music. It was the written composition that was important. Once people start using the recordings more than the compositions, now you need to protect the recordings. Now you need to get paid for the recordings themselves. And that's why BMI forms in 1939. In 1943, tape recorders are introduced to the American public. In 1943, Americans are introduced to the idea that you can take this magnetic plastic, very lightly magnetic, by the way. It's not like you can go pick up nails or something with it, but like this lightly magnetic tape, plastic strip, and you could record sound onto it and play it back. But even more importantly, the biggest advantage over the previous recording technology is that with tape, you can record over the top of it. You can't record over the top of vinyl. You can't take a record and then record something else over the top of that record. You have to literally melt down the vinyl and repress it. You have to go through the whole thing. With tape, I just record right over the top. Tape is also lighter It's also a lot more durable, right? It's really easy to break vinyl. Really easy to break vinyl. Tape, you have to like rip. If I drop a tape cassette, if I drop a tape reel, it won't break it. If I drop a record, there's a good chance it'll break. So tape recorders allow for reusing media, but it also allows for durability of media. It was a lot easier to mass produce tape than to mass produce vinyl. Producing vinyl is not easy. Not easy at all. Producing tape is a pretty streamlined, efficient process. And so it was much more built for the coming movement of distribution of music. In 1947, we get a peek at the LP. LP stands for long playing. Right, so it's a long playing record. An LP is what you're probably thinking of when you think of a vinyl record. Right? When you think of vinyl, you think of that big 12-inch black disc. That's an LP. Prior to the LP's introduction, we had what were called EPs for extended play. EPs are little 7-inch records. An EP contained generally 2 songs on it. You had a side A and a side B. Side A was the song you wanted everybody to hear. That was your big money maker. And side B was like a little bit extra. You know, is that like, oh, here's something else I've done too. But side A is what you bought the record for. The LP now allowed people to produce entire albums. Now you could record 45, 50, 60 minutes worth of music on one disc between the 2 sides. With an EP, again, you had 1 song per side maybe, right? So you had like 4 or 5 minutes per side. Prior to the LP, musical artists would focus on the song, right? That was the only unit that mattered, was the song, because that's what you put on a record. You would put 2 songs out at a time. After the LP comes out, okay, now I need a whole album, right? Now I need 8, 9, 10, 12 songs to put out. I've got more content I need to create to put on this record. This is another one of those, like, I'm an old man kind of situations, because back in my day, we worried about the whole album, right? We were concerned with, is it a good album? Your generation is a singles generation, right? You buy music by the unit of sale for you guys is the song, not the album. You don't download an album, you download a track. Right? But back when I was growing up, you bought a whole album. And so if there was only 1 good song on an album, you were pissed. Right? Why did I just pay all this money and there's only 1 song I actually want to hear? From an artist standpoint, that means you have to be able to produce quality content in mass. Not just a single song. You can't be a one-hit wonder. Right? You have to produce multiple good songs together. And that's a hell of a lot more difficult than just writing 1 good song. Think about the history of American music prior to 1947 and post-1947. The big names prior to 1947 were one-offs, right? There are people who had, like they were known for a song. After 1947 is where you get the bands and the artists that became real staples, right? Became long haul performers, became legends, because they had this wealth of material, because they had to put those things together now. Before the LP, nobody worried about putting together a whole catalog. In 1948, we see transistor radios hit the market. A transistor radio is a small portable radio. If you guys have ever gone to a baseball game, like a Major League Baseball game, I guarantee you've seen a transistor radio. Because every Major League Baseball game I've ever been to, there's at least one guy in the stands by himself with a little earpiece in, listening to the radio while he's watching the game and filling out a scorecard. And a transistor radio is simply a small portable radio. Prior to the transistor radio, radios were consoles, right? They were these giant cabinets you had in your living room. And it was the centerpiece, right? Everybody would sit in the living room to listen to the radio at night. But the radio was confined to that room because they were massive, right? They had these huge tube transmissions, and the cabling was all incredibly complicated and large, and big wooden cabinet bases. The transistor radio allowed you to listen to the radio on the move. I don't have to be stuck in my living room to listen to the radio now. Now I can listen to the radio everywhere I go. I can put it in my pocket, carry it around with me. Think of the freedom that gives people, right? Remember that the radio at that point in time was the source of information for most people. Most people got their information from radio broadcasts. Well, now you can get that information anywhere you go, right? You can be on the move and still be in touch, still be up to speed with what's going on in the world. In 1956, we finally get stereophonic sound. You all should be really happy about this because you have probably never heard something that wasn't stereophonic. It's just the norm now. Stereophonic is in contrast to monophonic sound. Stereophonic sound is where I have two channels of sound converging. I have a left channel and a right channel. And with stereophonic sound, I can either just duplicate noise on both channels, right? I can have the exact same sound coming out of both speakers, or I can have certain elements coming out of one side and other elements coming out of the other side, which creates a richer experience of the sound, which allows for a lot of creative tampering with how those sounds play off of each other and how it affects the listener. Some artists, even after stereophonic sound was invented, some artists still preferred monophonic, which is where it's just, yes, you have a left speaker and a right speaker, but they're both just playing the exact same thing, right? It's just a way of making the sound louder because it's coming from two speakers rather than one. Stereophonic allowed you to create kind of a soundscape, right? It allowed you to create this involvement from your listener where they felt like they were encompassed by the sound, not just being blasted with sound. And again, some artists still prefer monophonic. One of the best albums that's ever been recorded is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. It's widely considered to be one of the most brilliant albums recorded. And it was because they did amazing things. Brian Wilson did amazing things playing with stereophonic sound and how to layer these things in such a way that it hit the listener in a different way than just throwing a whole bunch of sounds at them all at once, right, all together. So stereophonic sound was a huge, huge move for the audio world because it opened up so many more creative opportunities. I mean, this is the reason that people like going to movie theaters for the most part is the sound experience, right? You get the surround sound, you get that THX surround. Well, that's all built on the idea of stereophonic sound that was introduced in 1956. 1958, for my money, the most important development in the history of American media. Not just recording media, not just audio media, period. Motown Records, 1958. And it's not the most important because it put out amazing music, though it did. It's important because of how it revolutionized business in America. Absolutely revolutionized business in America, especially business in media, especially business in audio media. Motown is short for Motor Town, Motor City, right? Motown was a record company that was founded in Detroit, Michigan, Detroit Rock City, and which is a shithole, by the way. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Detroit, but don't. It's a shithole. But a man named Berry Gordy started a record company called Motown Records in Detroit. And that in and of itself was not unique. There were localized record companies all over the United States by this point, right? What Berry Gordy did is he recognized that Detroit had a specific sound, right? The artists that came out of Detroit had a specific sound that they all kind of fed into. And again, in and of itself, not unique. Chicago had its scene, New York had its scene, Nashville had its scene, and they sounded regional, right? Like all music coming out of Chicago had a certain flair to it. The music coming out of Nashville had a certain flair to it. The music coming out of Detroit had a certain flair to it. And Berry Gordy realized, number one, we need to lean into that. We need to create this market space of like, yes, this is specifically our sound. But number two, Berry Gordy realized that that sound appeals outside of Detroit. Berry Gordy was able to take a regional idea and expand it to a national phenomenon. And he did so through brilliant ingenuity. Not unlike Henry Ford, who revolutionized industrial manufacturing with the idea of the assembly line. Berry Gordy realized, wait a minute. The old way of doing things was hope that you find a good song, hope that you find a good artist to perform that song, and then put it out. Gordy created stables. Gordy had a team of writers. That's what they did. He knew they could produce quality music. And so he hired them to work for him exclusively. He had phenomenal talent for singing. He had phenomenal acts. And he hired them to be exclusive to him. He also bought his own record pressing process, his own record pressing machine. In other words, everything you need to mass produce recorded music, he put all into one unit of business. He streamlined and integrated everything under him. He was able to cultivate talent through doing it this way. He was able to maximize profitability by doing it this way. He was able to avoid bullshit by doing it this way. He completely changed the way that people looked at how you do business in the recording industry. So I strongly encourage you, if you have any interest whatsoever in music, I don't care what kind of music you like. If you think music is good and in the most general of terms, learn more about Berry Gordy. If I could start a church of Berry Gordy, I would. The man is an absolute legend and did a phenomenal thing. Again, yes, I love Motown music, and if you don't love Motown music, you're a piece of shit, and I don't want to know you. Like, if you don't start dancing in your seat when you hear Smokey Robinson or the Temptations or the Supremes, who hurt you? At what point in your childhood did you lose any sense of wonder? Like, it's so, God, it burns your soul. Shut up, Ben. I don't want to hear you. Don't you dare.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard either of those songs.
They're not songs, they're artists, you son of a...
Yeah, songs, artists, same thing.
Oh, God.
Exactly. Sorry, I'm not old.
Okay, guess what we're doing on Monday, guys? We're just going to listen to a whole bunch of Motown, and I'm going to shame you. I'm going to shame the shit out of you. I'm just going to play a bunch of Motown and talk about why your parents don't love you.
Okay.
If you haven't already played this stuff for you. It's
I
just,
guess it doesn't hurt to try new things.
yeah, try new things, people. Branch out more. For the love of Pete. This is an institution of learning. This is a house of learned doctors. Learn more about Motown. Please, dear God, learn more about Motown. There's actually a really good documentary out there about Motown that actually they interview all of these, major artists and figures from Motown's history, including Berry Gordy, and it's such a great insight. But anyway, aside from the cultural impact of Motown music, again, there's the industry impact of Motown as a business and how Berry Gordy was able to, just completely change the way that people approach the idea of the record industry. Taking this regional product and turning it into a really global phenomenon, not even a national, but a global phenomenon. All right, I don't want Adam to yell at me about going over time again, so we'll stop there, and we'll pick up on Monday from here, hopefully in person. Let's plan on in person, but if shit goes down, I'll let you know. But we'll plan on in person on Monday. Okay.
Okay.
Night.
All right. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna go to Starbucks and make sure that Trent gets fired. I still do not have my free coffee. And I will see you guys all on Monday. Peace out. A-Town down.
Yeah.
Bye.